Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. Now, usually on the show, we build fun and inexpensive Commander decks within a $25 budget. Today, we're going to be doing something different, though. Today's going to be our very first episode of Break the Bank. On episodes like this one, we're going to take one of our Commander's Quarters decks and up the budget from $25 all the way up to $100. Sometimes you just love a deck so much that you're willing to put a little more into it to get some of those upgrades. Just a reminder that the prices that you see on this show are powered by our sponsor, TCG Player. Before we get started today, though, make sure you go check out our new Golden Pig playmat on thecommandersquarters.com. And thank you to everyone who's already purchased one. It really does help support the channel. Also, make sure that you subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell notification icon so that you can stay up to date on the latest Commander's Quarters episodes. Today's Break the Bank episode is going to be on Muldrotha the Gravetide. Now, if you haven't seen our deck tech on Muldrotha, make sure you watch that first, so click that link in the top right. That deck tech is going to take you through the strategy, tactics, and how to win with the deck. Whereas Break the Bank episodes like this one are going to show you how to upgrade the deck. I just need to make a quick disclaimer before we get started. When people ask me what I would swap out for the reasonable upgrades for a deck, I always tell them that it depends on your meta and your playstyle. So these upgrades in this video are going to be 100% from my perspective. And that perspective is going to differ from person to person, so just keep that in mind. Alright, now that we're on the same page, let's get into it. The Muldrotha deck completely depends on the commander being in play, so we need to make sure that we can protect Muldrotha. So we're going to upgrade our protection package with things like Sylvan Safekeeper, Lightning Greaves, and Darksteel Plate. Sylvan Safekeeper will let us sacrifice a land to give target creature we control Shroud until the end of the turn. We can do this any number of times that we need to, and since we can get those lands back from our graveyard, it's not that big of a deal. And then there's Lightning Greaves, which is a very cheap way for us to give Muldrotha protection as well. It only costs us 2 to get out, and we can equip it for free to give Muldrotha haste and Shroud. Next up is Darksteel Plate, which not only has Indestructible, but it's going to give Muldrotha Indestructible too. This is a very hard artifact to deal with because even if they somehow deal with our creature, we can just re-equip it next time for 2. So we've talked about protecting Muldrotha, but what about protecting ourselves? We're going to upgrade our self-protection package with things like Spore Frog and Elephant Grass. Spore Frog is a very cheap, repeatable fog effect for this deck. Since we can keep getting it back, it makes it very hard for our opponents to justify attacking us. And then there's Elephant Grass, which says black creatures can attack you and non-black creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature they control that's attacking you. This is just a strictly better and cheaper version of Ghostly Prison, but there is a downside since there is a cumulative upkeep. However, with this deck, we really don't care about that upkeep cost too much because we can just keep getting this back with Muldrotha. With this constantly in play, it's going to be very hard for our opponents to get through and attack us. Next up, we've got a couple of pieces of upgraded removal with Plaguecrafter and Shriek Maw. Now, neither of these are expensive cards, but I wanted to make sure that I mentioned them in this video as cards to add. They weren't in the original deck tech because Plaguecrafter hadn't come out at that time, and Shriek Maw was a little more expensive because Ultimate Masters hadn't come out either. And even though they're very affordable, both are great additions to the deck. Plaguecrafter is going to make each player sacrifice a creature or planeswalker when it comes into play, and each player who can't discards a card. We have some similar creatures to this one in the deck, but this one is the best by far. And then when Shriek Maw enters the battlefield, we get to destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature. But the thing that makes this card great in this deck is that it has an evoke cost of 1 and a black. So we can just keep casting it on each of our turns to kill a creature for just 2 mana. So singular removal is nice, but let's go over a Wrath that can really make a difference. Oblivion Stone is a fantastic upgraded Wrath for this deck. It has 4 tap, put a fate counter on target permanent, and 5 tap, sacrifice it to destroy each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it, then remove all fate counters from all permanents. So this is a Wrath that we can not only keep out to threaten our opponents, but we can also save our own permanents with it. This can get very one-sided and can absolutely demolish our opponent's boards. And then we can play things like Animate Dead to take advantage of that. Animate Dead is a great upgraded utility card for this deck. It's a card that can not only help us get creatures out of our opponent's graveyards, but also out of our own. Where it becomes really effective in this deck is when we have multiple creatures in our graveyard that we want to cast. Muldrotha's ability only lets us cast 1 creature each turn from our graveyard, but Animate Dead kind of gets around that. On top of that, it only costs us 2 mana, so it can really help us save on casting cost. Then we've got some cards that are really good at helping us get more and more cards into our graveyard. First up is Underrealm Lich, which has, if you would draw a card, instead look at the top 3 cards of your library and then put 1 into your hand and the rest into your graveyard, and at any time we can pay 4 life to give it indestructible until the end of the turn, but we have to tap it. So not only does this help us filter our draws, it also helps us fill our graveyard, and it can protect itself. Then there's Kiora, Master of the Depths. It's a planeswalker that starts off at 4 loyalty, and its +1 is untap up to 1 target creature and up to 1 target land. Its -2 is reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a creature card and or a land card from among them into your hand and put the rest into your graveyard. Its -8 is you get an emblem with whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may have it fight target creature. Then put 3 8/8 blue octopus creature tokens onto the battlefield. Now its +1 and -8 ability can be both very good in this deck, but the main reason that we have it here is because of its -2. It's not only a great way for us to get a card into our hand, but it's also a great way to fill our graveyard. Now, we didn't have any Planeswalkers in the original deck tech because of cost, but by adding one, we have another option in our graveyard for a permanent type to cast. Another way to upgrade our card advantage is with Mystic Remora and the Gitrog monster. Mystic Remora is an enchantment that says whenever an opponent plays a non-creature spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 4. Much like Elephant Grass, this card has a cumulative upkeep of 1, but again, we really don't care about that because we can just recast it from our graveyard anyway. And 4 is a really steep price for our opponents to pay, so they almost never pay it, and we get to draw a ton of cards off of this. And then there's the Gitrog monster, which has at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice it unless you sacrifice a land. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. Sacrificing lands really doesn't hurt us with this deck because again, we can just play them again from our graveyard. On top of that, we're running a ton of lands in this deck that can sacrifice themselves so that we can get some additional draw off of this. Now, drawing cards is great, but an upgraded tutor card can be even better. Sidisi Undead Vizier has Exploit, and whenever it exploits a creature, you can search your library for a card, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So for just 5 mana, we can keep casting Sidisi over and over again, exploiting itself and searching our library for the perfect card. It can even help us search for an upgraded win con like Mindslaver. Mindslaver is a legendary artifact that costs 6, and we can pay 4 to tap and sacrifice it to gain control of target player during their next turn. So if we have 10 mana up, we can just use that player over and over again to help us win. This deck can ramp very quickly, so it's not too hard for us to get to 10 mana. And once we're down to a 1-on-1, we basically just win the game once Mindslaver's in play. So we've talked about some great upgrades for the deck, but what are we taking out for those cards? So let's go over those cards now and what's out. First up, there's Font of Fertility and Coiling Oracle. Both are good at helping us ramp and fix our mana, but we already have a ton of other cards that help us do that. On top of that, we'll get to some lands that really help with our fixing. And then we've got Demonic Vigor, Skeletal Grimace, and Medicine Bag, each of which help protect Muldrotha. But again, we just went through some other upgraded cards that are even better at helping protect her. Next up is Sidisi's Faithful, which is a good temporary removal spell. It just doesn't have the impact that we really want for this deck, and it doesn't do anything permanent. And then there's Seal of Doom, Slum Reaper, and Willbringer Demon, each of which will permanently get rid of creatures, but again, they are lacking compared to some of our upgrades. Next up, we've got some board wipes that we'll be taking out with Time of Ice and Bane of the Living. Both of these can just require too much setup for us to rely on. We have to wait until the third lore counter gets put on Time of Ice to get the effect that we want. And then with Bane of the Living, we actually have to cast it as a morph first and then unmorph it to get its effect. And then we've got a couple of mill cards that we'll be taking out with Vessel of Nascency, Crawling Sensation, and Sultai Ascendancy. Each of these are still good cards in their own right, but they're just some better options when we upgrade. And finally, the last non-land card out is Hesitation. In some situations, Hesitation can be a great card and help deter our opponents from actually casting any spells. But in other situations, it's just not as effective as we need it to be, and it can fall flat. But now it's time to see what kind of lands we'll be upgrading to in Land Found. With a 3-color deck, it's especially important for us to have the right mana. So we're going to be upgrading to cards like Command Tower and Exotic Orchard. Command Tower can tap for any of our colors, and Exotic Orchard can most of the time. Then there's Overgrown Tomb, which is a Swamp Forest, and Sunken Hollow and Fetid Pools, which are both island swamps. These come in huge in this deck because there are cards that we can actually use to search for them and put them into play, and this really helps us easily fix our mana. On top of that, when we play Overgrown Tomb, we can have it enter untapped if we pay 2 life. And then if we control 2 or more basic lands, we're going to have Sunken Hollow enter the battlefield untapped. And Fetid Pools has the nice little addition that we can actually cycle it for 2 if we need to draw a card. Next up, we've got some more lands that can come into play untapped. Woodland Cemetery comes into play untapped if we control a swamp or a forest. Hinterland Harbor comes into play untapped if we control a forest or an island. And Drowned Catacomb comes into play untapped if we control an island or a swamp. These are just strictly better than some of the cards that we had coming into play tapped that tap for the same colors. And then there's Ghost Quarter, which can either tap for a colorless or we can tap to sacrifice it to destroy target land. Its controller then gets to search the library for just a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield. This is a great card in this deck because we can just keep getting this back over and over again to destroy our opponent's key lands. And finally, we're going to be adding in 1 forest. With all the upgrades to the deck shifted to be slightly more green, so we made this change. If we're putting some lands in, we've got to take some out, so let's go on to Land Lost. First up, we've just got some slightly worse green and black lands with Golgari Guildgate, Foul Orchard, and Jungle Hollow. And then some worse green and blue lands with Woodland Stream and Thornwood Falls. And again, some worse blue or black lands with Jawar Isle Refuge and Dismal Backwater. And the next card that we're taking out is Terminal Moraine. With all of our upgraded lands, we just don't need this card for fixing as much as we did. And again, with the upgraded cards, we're going to be shifting around our basic lands, so we're going to be taking out 2 swamps. Now that we've gone through every single one of our cards, let's see how this upgraded deck compares in price to others. A quick reminder that deck costs are calculated using TCG player optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. Today's average Muldrotha EDH rec deck is going to set you back $348.92, so let's see how we compare to that. Our upgraded deck is going to come in just under budget at $99.98. Even with our increased budget, our deck is much more affordable than the EDH rec deck. And with that, our show is coming to a close, but I really want to hear about what you guys think about these upgrades, so why don't you let me know in the comments below. And I especially want to hear about what you guys think about these Break the Bank episodes with our upgraded decks. So please let me know in the comments below if you liked it or didn't like it, or if there's a Commander's Quarters deck that you want to see a Break the Bank episode on. When you're buying upgrades or decks, make sure you're using our links in the description below. because not only will you get great prices on TCG Player, but you're also going to be supporting this show because they sponsor us. And make sure you follow us on social media so you can get some early hints on who the next Commander just might be for a deck tech or even for a Break the Bank episode. Links to all of our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There's even a general tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe and check out some of our other videos on budget deck techs, commander excluded deck techs, and super budget episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.